This is Ahlan Moladina interviewing Gavin Young at his home in Smethwick. He was born in 1975 in Johannesburg, South Africa, and he migrated to the UK in 1996 at the age of 21. Tell me about your childhood.
My childhood was idyllic. I lived right on the outskirts of Johannesburg, where the edge of the city and the suburbs bled into the veld. So the veld is just open scrublands, all browns and yellows. And one side you looked towards the city far in the distance with its needle sticking out, Hillbrow Tower, which is a little bit like in Birmingham where you have the BT Tower and you know where you are. If you look to the BT Tower, you could see right in the distance. And then in the suburbs sprawling out in the flatlands, and then in the high places where we were, right on the ridges, you could wander for days and days into the wilderness. So my childhood was spent picking up rocks and finding scorpions underneath and feeding ants to little trapdoor spiders and poking at snakes and wandering through scrubs and bushes and disappearing for the whole day and feeling completely safe. Little did I know that the safety was, there was a sting in the scorpion's tail, as in this safety was born from the fact that I was living in pretty much a Nazi state, where the whole country had been swept over with a whole rain of fear that you got inklings of when you were young. So as a small child playing in my garden, the gentleman who came over to clean the garden and to work in the garden was called the garden boy. That didn't make any sense to me. I was brought up to respect my elders, and I would definitely not call someone who could be my grandfather the boy. And he spoke to me as sir, and that felt weird. What was going on here? There was something strange at work here. Why did the woman who came and cleaned in the house and pretty much looked after me more than my mum was even at home, who laughed with me, who taught me how to cook, who cleaned with me, who listened to me while I read, and just spent lots and lots of time with me, why was she, our maid, not allowed to eat from the dishes that I ate from? Why did she have to eat from a metal plate that was kept with the dog's dishes? What was unclean about her? Surely there was nothing unclean. Why was she only allowed to use the carbolic soap that we washed garden tools with and dog's dishes with, while we could use any other soap? Walking along with my grandfather into the city centre, I remember going through doors into a supermarket and my grandfather grabbing me by the collar and yanking me back and saying, "You're not to go through those doors are not for you." Just a set of doors going into a centre. And he pulled me aside to another set of doors just to the left. Just another set of doors going through into the same shopping centre, but above one of the doors it said whites only. Why? Who were the whites? Who were the not whites? I didn't understand. Going to the museum years later and going into one of the toilets and coming out, and my grandfather once again scolding me because I'd gone into the toilets that were not for whites. But I didn't see anything strange. They smelled just as bad as men's toilets anywhere. What was going on? So there was a undercurrents of things going on where in amongst this idyllic childhood, you couldn't see, but you caught wind of inequalities and things going on that didn't make sense. And passively, we're learning to be racist, learning things like black people are dangerous. They blow up places. They're blowing up Wimpies and burger places that they'll steal, they'll rob, they'll lie. Black people are smelly. But I'd step onto what was called a black taxi, not allowed to go on those, it's only for black people, and only smell soap and natural perfumes. I only smelled cleanliness. It didn't make any sense at all. And then there were rumblings of a change in the country coming. As I was growing up, you found out that maybe the black people were going to be free. And our parents were scared. And they were saying, what happens if a black person lives next door? And I thought, but this makes no sense. Wilhelmina, our maid, who's almost like a mother to me, in fact, so much so I have her laugh, she lives in my house. who cares if someone lives next door and they're of a different color? And Messiah, her son, who is now more a brother to me than my own brothers, well, there's nothing wrong with him. And he's definitely not stupid like they say black people are. He's much cleverer than me. He already speaks 2 languages and he's learning a third. And by the time I'd gone through my childhood, he could speak 5 languages fluently. And I can only speak 1 with smatterings of another. Wow. So all these stories were coming through so that under the undercurrents of inequalities and stuff, everything was hidden. Your music was controlled. You weren't allowed to listen to anything by a black artist or an artist who spoke of freedom and rebellion. These things were scratched off. There were artists who suddenly died. This guy, everyone was walking around their country singing, "Don't worry, be happy." And everyone singing this amazing song by this black guy who threw himself out of a window because he got so depressed. And the song was actually just his way of saying how depressed he was. It was ironic. A lie. A complete lie. He's living and well. A band who were sweeping through the country singing songs called Sugar Man. And talking about awakening through hallucinogens and inequalities in politics and poverty and who had the money. And he was said to have burned himself alive and thrown himself into the crowd on fire and died. No, he was living very fine and well over in America, unaware that all his albums were swelling an underculture of rebellion in the country. So when my kind of adopted brother Messiah, my maid's son, was getting older, getting to 16, 17, and I would take him out with me. We'd go to the movies together, whatever, and I'd be told he's not allowed to come into this cinema. I say, "Where's the sign? Where's your whites only sign?" "None here. So you can't do anything about it." And he'd come in with me. And then people would leave the cinema because I was sitting next to a black person. Or we'd go into a restaurant and people would feel uncomfortable, not know what to say. But my generation, my friends were cool, had no problem. We started as a group of friends to question what was going on, what we were being told, what was true, what was lies. And I think all through that childhood, didn't know that my parents, my dad having come from England, he knew about freedom. He knew about equality and was living in a country where there was terrible inequalities and hated it. But he was not allowed to return to England because he was born in South Africa, had left and come to England when he was not even 1 year old, and come back to South Africa when he was 18 to travel. And when he came, he travelled, he fell in love. And when he wanted to return to England, Margaret Thatcher was in power and he was not allowed to return to the country. He was an immigrant who was not able to get a visa. And he wasn't even allowed back his own country. So he was forced to stay in South Africa, even though he completely hated the politics. And the only thing that he could do was carefully, quietly employ black people. Carefully, quietly get Messiah, our maid's son, to learn and to teach his mom English and to teach her to read. Just gently, quietly allow gay people into the house because you couldn't even be gay. It wasn't just color of skin, it was sexuality too. Carefully allow people with mixed race relationships, where there would be an Indian person and a white person. Not many Indian people around in the country, and definitely none of them. You weren't allowed. It was illegal to marry someone who was of a different race. And so all these things were happening, and didn't realize that inside of me there was a bit of a rebel being born. So when I got to my fine late teenage years, and a terrible thing happened. 1992, Mandela's due to be released. There's all these undercurrents of freedom, of a new country are coming, and there's terrible fear in the country. People were walking around with gun belts. You didn't see guns. Guns were allowed in the country, but they were in a cubbyhole, in a safe, in a holster underneath a coat. You didn't see them brandished around. Suddenly, people were walking around with shotguns, with it looked like mini Rambos walking around with great big rifles and machine guns and things, afraid of civil war, thinking that the blacks were going to absolutely massacre the whites. And as a young person, we were feeling like, too right. Absolutely, they should. People were leaving the country in their droves. Mandela was due to be released. People were going to say that he was going to get out and he was going to say, fight! And then 2 young black guys broke into the IBM center in Cape Town, shot a security guard in the leg, and were captured. This is what happens, the newspapers say. This is what happens when you give people freedom. They had allowed some of the borders to open up. And so Messiah, my brother, says, I wonder if this is true. And we go to the jail and we find this young guy, Kogetsu, a young kid who has a package delivered to his family with a gun and his sister's finger inside. And every day that he doesn't go and rob the IBM center, another finger will be delivered to him. Never shot a gun before. That's why when he went and broke in, he shot the security guard in the leg. And now we want the real story. And so we appealed to IBM to get us some funding to put on a play to tell the real story. Come on, you're an international business. You have an onus to tell the real story here and to re-educate people about things. And so we found the real story, got this story about Congolese gangsters who'd come in. They were from outside the country. They'd lorded it over these kids for the sake of drug money. And this is just a kid. Just a good kid who's trained to be a DJ. He's loved in his community. And so IBM helped us with a case and to put on a play. And we didn't know that what we were doing was really, really, really getting noticed. We had no idea. We were putting on a play in a small community theatre, but it was making waves, what we were doing, the questions we were asking, the articles that were being put out, the undercurrents of things, just a small story, one story that could change things. And then we heard that people were shooting each other in these black taxis, Volkswagen minivans, and this is what happens. This is what blacks do. They shoot each other. There's such violence. And we go to find out the story there. Now we've learned a bit about asking questions, finding out. And we find out once again, this is gangsters, Nigerian and Congolese gangsters, getting inside of taxis and holding a gun to the driver and saying, give me all your money, and extorting money from them and then shooting other drivers because they were on their turf. This was not the people from our country fighting each other. And so the story came out. We went to Volkswagen, got some money to do the play, got the story out there, put it in the same theatre. We're really enjoying it because we had a mixed race cast. Messiah was directing as a young black guy. Had no idea that these things were threatening until my parents came to me and said, you got to go. You can't stay. You've made things so dangerous for us in this country that we have one option for you. You need to leave. So they gave me a ticket and I was sent here to South Africa pretty much as a refugee, really. And my brother Messiah went to Johannesburg to his family there to kind of hide out, and he went into Zimbabwe. And that was my introduction to this country. In the meantime, in South Africa, things were changing. Mandela got out and there was absolutely nothing. Peace. It was the biggest nothing in history. No fighting. He got out and said, just forgive each other. Love one another. ANC were allowed as a political party and they didn't blow anything up. They started organizing a peaceful government, integrating with the old government in a way that they never thought they would. And there were suddenly rupturings and stories of a new South Africa, a rainbow nation that Desmond Tutu, this wonderful bastion of peace, had been speaking about forever. And now it was here, but I was in England and all of that was happening. So the South Africa that I knew had changed right in the midst of me going. And I came to Birmingham thinking, this would be a very different place.
Tell us about moving to the UK.
I had pictures of the UK that were, I think it's an overused word, but quaint is probably right. Little villages, people singing and telling stories in pubs. I'd watched lots of movies, we had Michael Caine and you saw grittier sides of England. So you knew that there were cities just like we had in South Africa, but I had no idea that the country was so diverse. I had no idea that the country was locked down into such a state of working where there was very little contact with nature. So coming to the country, flying in to Heathrow, and I remember the very first thing of waiting for my cousin to come and pick me up, and he lived up in Yorkshire, and he was coming down to fetch me, and I was sitting in a little alcove of a pub, and I went up to the bar and I said, "Can I have a black coffee, no milk, please?" And the guy at the bar said, "What?" I said, "Can I have a black coffee, no milk, please?" He said, "What?" And I realized, he doesn't understand me. "Can I have a black coffee with no milk?" And he said, "Why didn't you say so?" And then he brought me this black coffee, And I realized, I'm going to have to change the way I speak. I thought I spoke perfect English. That was a shock. And then we're driven through to Birmingham. My cousin had opened the very first Wetherspoons pub in the country in High Wycombe. And we were now opening the second pub in the country, the second Wetherspoons, and that's the Figure of Eight in Birmingham. And just fitting out the shop, it was a new idea. And my family were thinking, wow, this is, not only am I getting out of the country, but I've got a chance to travel. But I didn't want to travel. I wanted to find out what the England of my dad's childhood was about. I wanted to see, because even just in that small shock of coming to London and finding out that it was just this sprawling city where in one street there was a market, and next street was quiet gardens, and next street was a broken down estate, and next street was beautiful houses. There was nothing I expected. There was none of the quaintness. This was city life in a way I'd never seen before. And then coming to Birmingham, and it was a mess. It was horrible. It was grey, it was dirty. Where we were opening up our pub on Broad Street, there were corrugated iron factories that were dilapidated and falling in. I was thinking, what a place to have a pub. This is crazy. There was only one other pub on the street. It was O'Neill's next to us, and the Australasian bar, the Walkabout bar, was opening down the bottom. And they were just starting to clear away in Brindley Place and do some of the work around the Icon Gallery. And it just felt like, God, this is a real dive. But in coming to Birmingham, I'd go walk on the street and try and find directions. And in London, where I might have found directions and someone would back away in fear, in Birmingham, someone would go, "All right, how's it going? Where are you from?" And you start talking to you, and people seem friendlier. But then we opened the door of the pub, and because of my accent and because I was white, people immediately assumed that I was in the country because I'd left, like many other South Africans, because I didn't want to live in a country where blacks were ruling. And so I came to the country, and people would make really, really horrible racist comments, and my cousin would have to hold me back. Not that I could do anything about it. I'd probably bite their ankles. I'm only a small guy. But I found that there was a racism here that I was shocked to find. The friend that I really warmed to within Wetherspoons, a wonderful guy who I went clubbing with and danced with and whatnot. We spent lots of time together talking in the pub, maybe going out and having a drink together. But then one day he was coming over up New Street with a group of his friends. And I went and said hello to him, and he pretended like he didn't even know me, just ignored me. I thought, what's going on here? And I saw him the next day in the pub and said, what's going on? And he said, it was fine for him to be friends with me when we were alone and whatever, but when he was with his friends, he could not be seen to be friends with a white guy. I thought, what is going on there? I thought I've come to a free country. I thought I've stepped away from this third world madness of segregation. I didn't think any place would be like this here. And so I started to ask people and find out their stories. Just speak to people on the street. What's it like living in Birmingham? I started to go to churches because I was very religious back then. And I went to different churches, and I'd find, like in Aston, a church that was full of black people who felt very strange that a white person was amongst them. I said, what's going on? And an old guy saying to me, you've got to understand, we've been put down as black people in this country for just as long as in South Africa, but it wasn't legislated here. It wasn't law. Geez, this is a shock to me. I went and lived in all the places where people said you shouldn't. I lived in Nozelles in a time where kids were making guns and shooting each other and finding out what's going on. I'm living with a family where the dad is Jamaican, the mom's Irish, white Irish. So the kids are mixed heritage, and they go to school and they get beaten up by the white guys because they're black. They get beaten up by the black guys because they're white, and they get beaten up by the Indian guys because they're black. And so they built themselves up and learned kung fu and are two really tough kids living a tough reality that was a shock to me. And finding out that these kids were felt like they weren't going to get anywhere in life. But one of them, the older brother, Andrew, his dad worked on cars in his garage. He'd take the little offcuts of pipes and bits like that, and he's used his dad's soldering torch, and he'd turn things into the most exquisite jewelry. He was amazing. So I got a suit for him. We cleaned up his CV, and I took him to 3 interviews in the jewelry quarter for work. I thought they're just going to see what he can do, and that's it. They'll take him on. And we sat in a line of other interviewees, and the moment the first lady came out to interview him, she took one look at him, and in an instant, her eyes said, "No way. Not going to employ this guy." And the guy that I was with, the kid, his shoulders hunched forward, and he was saying, nah, see what I mean? I'm never going to get a job here. And it was true. Every single place we went to, we saw that look in someone's eye, and there was no ways he was going to get that job. And so when someone would say to me, "Geez, black people in this country, they got a real chip on their shoulder," I say, well, have you taken off that chip and examined it? Have you asked them why? Have you seen how people were brought over to this country to get people from the picket line and paid less? Have you seen how this government has brought in wave after wave of immigrants and paid them to come to this country so that people can't protest on the picket lines, so that they can keep the price of workforce down and keep their profits up? And you turn around and you say immigrants are the problem, but your government is the one bringing them here. And what are we actually doing in this country? We're working our bums off because we're free. We're in a country where I can work in anything. I can be anything I want to be. I can be an actor. I couldn't be an actor in South Africa. It didn't pay. I could work in a garage and then teach by night. I can do anything. The world's my oyster. And so I can start up entrepreneurial ventures. I can open up a shop. I can get funding. They'll actually pay me in this country to start a shop. They'll give me a whole grant. The government gives you £8,000 for small business startups. So in the midst of coming to this country and thinking I'm going to find freedom, quaintness, the lovely, soft, gentle English-spoken people, I found the same harshness and segregation as I found anywhere else. The difference about Birmingham was, I saw a mix of people that I didn't see elsewhere. I could go out into the country and I might see only white faces, and someone might feel uncomfortable if an Indian person was there. But in Birmingham, there was just people from all over the place. Congolese, Nigerian, Indian, Chinese, everyone was here. And people seemed to be getting on just fine, thank you very much. So it seemed like, I don't understand. I can't get this country. I felt really lost inside and lost in this country. It was so culturally different, and yet shared so many similarities with South Africa. So yeah, I came fleeing racism, fleeing a corrupt government, and seemed like I'd come to another. I came to Birmingham because my cousin was opening up a pub here, and I decided to help him open up the pub. I'd never heard of Birmingham, not even Birmingham, Alabama. I didn't know. In England just had Manchester, where the famous football team played, and all of us wore the shirts and supported the team, even though we'd never been there, and London. And so came to Birmingham, and it was just this terrible, grotty city that didn't feel safe. There were people on the streets where I didn't think you'd have people on the street. Does that happen here? And when I stayed in Birmingham, I lived above the pub, so I lived right smack in the city centre, and I watched it transforming and changing. But it was in the city centre where I saw these corrugated factories around Brindley Place and Broad Street just knocked down, and then around them built these glorious buildings, theatres, cafes, bars. The whole of Broad Street over the 2 years that I was working in the pub started to change. More pubs opened up, a cinema at the end of the street. It started to link with the city centre and with the ICC and the famous convention center started to feel like it was part of Broad Street, and that was part of the city. And the whole center in the middle, where there was no bullring, there was a terrible grotty old marketplace that you wouldn't go to unless you'd been going there all your life, and your parents had a stall there, was just knocked in, and they built this incredible bullring. So the city transformed. It changed and changed as a city right in front of my face. But as it was changing, I wanted to know what was outside. I'd go on a bus to like visit a friend, or to go to a place that I'd never heard of. And I'd see that Birmingham was so different. It seemed like there were sections that were really different. I'd go into an area that was completely Afro-Caribbean, it seemed. I'd go into an area that was totally Indian. I'd go into an area that was white and working class, or white and middle class. And I thought, what's the story in these places? So I wanted to live there. So because I was renting, I'd go off and live, and people called me mad, but I'd go and live in places where people shouldn't. So I remember finding out about Lascelles, finding out that there had been riots there. And I thought, ooh, this sounds like a story I want to know. And I went and lived in Lascelles, where it was just, there was a downtrodden feeling to the place. People living on top of each other in small houses where I'd grown up, where people lived in large houses, freestanding with big gardens. I only realized how affluent we had been when I came and lived in this place, and saw that everyone walked with their shoulders down, heads down, very little eye contact. The people were wearing gang colors, and I thought that only happened in America. The kids were rapping and speaking of a violence that was coming from within them, and I thought, what have you got to be angry about? You're living in this free country. The first flat that I lived in, when I moved in, the night I moved in, some kids broke in and stole the boiler. Who steals a boiler? I mean, still a TV, still, whatever, phones, things like that. But they stole the boiler, and they found out that the boiler was worth £1,000. It's an expensive item, and these kids knew exactly what they were doing, and they were caught, and the cops found out who they were. They left their fingerprints everywhere, and I found out they were just a bunch of kids. And they felt like the system was absolutely not going to work for them. They were never going to get the jobs they wanted. They were never going to earn the money they were. There was only one option for them, and that was to earn money through crime and drugs. And this was a strange place for me. Lovely parks that looked lovely to the eye, but you couldn't walk in them. They had beautiful trees, beautiful green spaces, beautiful playgrounds, but you'd probably get mugged there or attacked. It was a rough, tough place. I remember going then and living in Acox Green, and there's this band of land where you were between the lovely area of Solihull and a kind of working class, middle class area, and there was this band of poverty, of Irish poverty, it seemed, where people had come over and rebuilt England, and they were very proud of that, but had been stuck in a system of benefits. And I didn't even know what benefits were. What was benefits? What do you mean? I heard about the dole. I heard about people being able to get money from the government. What did that mean? That made no sense to me. How could you not work and still live and still eat? And I found out people who were not clawing things from the government, as it seemed like people were saying, that these people were trapped because they only had one option: go work in factories and dead-end jobs that made them depressed and upset, and where the work conditions were terrible, or don't work and actually get more money and actually be with their families. This was a strange thing that I saw. And yet the area around looked quite beautiful. The estates had gardens in between them and playgrounds between them, and you walked out into the streets, and you in next thing you know, you in Hall Green, and it was leafy green, or Solihull, and it was affluent, and Acox Green seemed like it was okay. So it seemed like within areas you could have pockets of no man's land where people had got wodged into those areas because there were council properties. I got a job then working with Charles Schwab Europe, a share dealing company, that gave me a little bit more money and allowed me to stay in Selly Oak. And now that was cool. I was living right below the university. I was living with a bunch of students. There was lots of vibe to it. It was alive and kicking, parties going on all the time, students debating all kind of things, lots of activities happening for people who weren't students. at the campus and outside the campus. It was cool because I was living with students who had to work hard, but they also played hard, but I never had to study. So I just got the joy and the freedom of partying hard and having lots of parties. But even amongst that, these students, I was finding out and saying to the students just naturally to make conversation, what are you studying? Why are you studying that? I go, I don't know. I don't know why I'm studying that. I've got to study something. I thought, God, in my country, it costs a bomb to study. You really, but here, it was free to study. And because it was free, these kids were throwing away this incredible opportunity to study in a way that my family couldn't afford. And that was a strange thing to me. Education that wasn't valued. And kids who seemed to have all the freedom and prospects in the world, just throwing it away in drink and drugs and parties and not focusing on their studies. That was a strange world. Where else have I lived in Birmingham? The Black Country, where I live now. I had heard about the Black Country. What made it black? Coming from South Africa, they seemed quite enticing. I'm going to go live in the Black Country. And I came to a place where apparently you couldn't understand what people were saying, but I could understand them just fine. Even though they say things like, oh, Klondike and chips are, kid. Live up your bunk, like. And you gathered there was a lingo and a language here that had lasted 1,000 years. In the Doomsday Book, people were saying the same things as they're saying now. People are strong in their heritage. But their heritage is also a heritage of people working hard. So they're living in these houses, working hard for their money, working in factories, long, hard hours, working in menial jobs, and angry because they've worked really hard. And now immigrants are coming in, like me, and taking their jobs. But I'm okay. I'm not an immigrant. I'm white. What? I said, how does that make me any different? I've come over here. I've come and I'm taking your jobs. But your culture's the same. But do you know anything about the other cultures? I'd ask people, and people around seem to have such a prejudice. And it mostly was born from the fact that people were taking their jobs and they were buying houses and they were afraid that their culture was going. And in the midst of living in the Black Country, I came in a time where minority groups were very healthily finding their voice. Sikh people going down the streets with orange flags and banners and celebrating their festivals. Muslim people were getting together in their communities and building mosques and proudly, huge castle-like buildings that were happy about the fact that they surrounded themselves with Muslims and Muslim converts. But people in these Black Country areas were afraid of that. I moved and lived in Cape Hill, a place where my wife now was born, and back then it was working class, low class, English, Irish, and it changed so much so that when I went there, I knew it as a place where there was Indian shops and Afro-Caribbean shops and was mostly Punjabi, and that's what the people were afraid of here. That their area and their lives were getting taken over, and there wasn't anything I could say to people here to show that people were just people. And even though you could speak to someone who's really nice on a nice street that looked like any other street in England, with two up, two down houses, council houses on one side, own houses on the other, and you can chat to people in their gardens, and they couldn't say a sentence without saying something racist. But if you asked them about those things, if you tried to prod deeper, they didn't know why they had those sentiments they had. So once again, all the areas that I was living in, I was getting very different stories, different places. That's what I'm about, really, in the story. England, outside of a city, has a feminine beauty. It's all greens and flowing and rolling hills. And South Africa has a real masculine beauty. It's all rugged and dark browns and yellows. And that's the first thing that strikes you about this country, even flying in. It's a different world. And I remember walking my first night through Birmingham and looking up at the sky and going, where's my sky gone? I was used to looking up in the sky and seeing so many stars you could barely see black. You could see the Milky Way. You could see shooting stars regularly. You could see the comets just coming into the atmosphere and burning out. You could see satellites. You could follow them round. But I looked up in the sky here, and you could barely see any stars. And the stars you could see were not the stars I'd grown up with. I truly flipped into another place. I thought, wow, this city is so polluted. And the light is giving off so much that you can't even see the sky. And I talked to people about, have you been here in England, or have you been there in England, asking where it was good to go and travel to. And people had never left Birmingham. When I came to live in the Black Country, people had never been to Birmingham. Even when I lived now, like in Smethwick, people had never would never go to the city centre. My own parents-in-law, they won't go to the centre. They don't go to Birmingham. It's 10 minutes down the road. It's just next door. In fact, you're almost more in Birmingham than you are in the Black Country, and yet people won't even go that far. And I think I found that really strange, because in South Africa, distance is so different. So I remember my brother moving to the country, and I phoned him up and said, hi, where have you chosen to stay? And he said, oh, it's a place, it's just outside of London. I said, oh, where's that? And he said, Coventry. I just thought, what? That's not London. That's just outside of Birmingham. But that's the distance, the concept of traveling for hours to go to a place, where Birmingham is so close. The sea is only an hour and a bit away either direction. London's just an hour and a bit away. Everything's so tight. You're on an island. And it's a concept you can't grab hold of when you come from a huge, vast country that's open. You can walk for weeks and not reach the edge of it. So this feeling of being enclosed and living in areas where there was so much free space, and coming here and finding people on a street. I remember living in Cape Hill and living behind the old MMV brewery, and looking at the street and seeing all these 2 up, 2 down houses, just terraced houses, and counting how many houses there were in the street and realizing, oh my God, there's 50 houses just on this small street. And there's 2 up, 2 downs. Most of them have families. And I started to do the maths. And so I thought, 50 houses with 5 people in each house. Oh my goodness, there's just hundreds of people living on one street. And then I walked a little bit up the hill, and you could see terraced houses, like little boxes on the hillside, and realized how compact everyone was in the city, and started to think, wow, this is a whole different feeling. People are living right on top of each other. No wonder they feel threatened. Whereas in South Africa, you got so much more space to move and space to think. Here, that you couldn't get away from the clatter of industry and the noise of buses. It might even come through on this recording. You couldn't get away from siren sounds, and you couldn't get out into nature easily. And that I found quite constraining. I'd find myself needing to just go out into nature, walk to Licky Hills. I used to walk from Birmingham to Licky Hills. People thought I was mad. Talk about distance. It only takes me an hour. I said, but you can get a bus. Why would I want to take a bus? There's a beautiful walk, I get some exercise along the way. People didn't have a concept of walking to places, of the joy of travel, of the time that it would take. Everything was fast, quick, has to happen today. Whereas where I grew up, where everything was, it's okay, tomorrow's another day, it's fine. Social life was completely different. In South Africa, people came to your house, your door was open. People would come knock the door, sometimes just walk in and know that they'll be welcome. There was none of this friendship by appointment stuff that we have here in England. You were welcome. You walked in, and wherever you were, you'd get a cup of tea. If you stayed on because you were chatting so long, you'd get something to eat. There was lots of barbecues, what we call braais, where people would sit around with a beer in their hand, chatting, laughing, talking, watching sports. And being a warm country and living in the affluent way that we were living, most people had swimming pools in their garden. Well, that sounds mad to some people here, but we all had swimming pools. Because boiling hot country, you'd go and jump in the swimming pool. So lots of your time would be spent around swimming. And when I moved to Cape Town from Johannesburg, lots of time would be spent at the beach. But that way of life here, I would live in areas all around Birmingham where no one would go in their houses. This street that I'm living on now, I can say hello and have known people for 10 years. I feel like I'm on really great terms with them, but they won't accept my offers to come over. Come have a cup of tea. I've been speaking to you for years. Come to see you. There's this fear of letting people in. What if I don't like them? What happens if I can't get rid of them? Are they going to take advantage of me? A strange kind of ethos where in South Africa there's a lot more freedom to meet people and to meet new people. And so people, when I come from South Africa, people say, "Oh, South Africans are really friendly," and that's not always true because we're just people. But there's much more of a gregarious, outgoing attitude because that's what we're about. Coming to a country where the social life was based on pubs. Now that's slowly declining, thankfully, but when I came here, I was opening up a pub and seeing it firsthand. People who'd come to the pub. Now, the idea of a Wetherspoons pub was that the music wasn't so loud that you couldn't even hear each other talk. There was no music. This was a revolutionary idea. People could actually have a conversation over the beer they were buying. And our pub would be thronging with 500 people, and people would come to the bar and someone would order another drink and say, "I don't even know why I'm here. There's not even any music." And I say, "Is it because you can talk?" And they go, "Nah, it's because the beer's cheap." I say, "Oh, great," but people were talking. And that was something they only did in pubs. And it seemed like people didn't necessarily talk about deeper things. People just wanted to talk about football and politics and the bad postal service and the lack of jobs and immigrants. And these same things flowing through all the time. And I would ask people about, who are you? What do you dream of? What do you want to do with your life? And people wouldn't want to talk about that kind of thing. You could feel people backing away, looking at me like I was strange. Why did I want to ask these questions? The level of conversation was so closed and seemed shallow, and not in a way that people are shallow because everyone's deep, but that people had didn't want to be in touch with their feelings and with where they were. And so culturally I felt quite alone, where people didn't want to talk and didn't want to speak. And as a white person, finding more affinity with people who came from other countries, because I was white, those people would see me in the same way they saw white English people and wouldn't necessarily be open to talking either. So I was in a strange world, not accepted by the people I felt an affinity to, but not finding the depth within the people I was supposed to be with. Culturally, a whole ethos of going out and buying and shopping and spending and getting more stuff, and judging each other based on what you were wearing. My kids growing up and wanting to have branded clothing. Why? Why do you want to wear a shirt that makes you walk around as an advertising for a company for free? What is it? Because this is cool. This is what we wear. And what are you going to do when you go into town? We're going to buy stuff. Why don't you go and meet and spend time and hang out and talk? Just doesn't exist. So this consumer culture, where our culture was based on being outside, being outdoors, being with each other, talking, I found that culture really, really strange. When I was opening up the pub in 1996, the Wetherspoons pub, the Figure of Eight, the International Convention Centre had a really amazing guest coming. His name was Nelson Mandela. I'd never got close to the man in my own country, and yet here he was coming to Birmingham. And I thought, Birmingham? It's like no place to be. I've seen it for myself. But he was coming to this famous convention centre to twin Johannesburg with Birmingham. What was that about? What did it mean to twin? So I went along to this talk and heard himself speak and the mayor of Birmingham speak about the infrastructure of Birmingham was built upon a city that owned its own land. Right back from 1850s, when iron ores were discovered, and Galtons and Boltons, not perfect people, but people who had bought up the land for the people, ceded it to the local council, to the local universities, and kept the church out, and kept the London as a city out. started a contention between London and Birmingham. So there's always been rivalry between Birmingham and London politically, and especially with the conservative London and the Labour-focused Birmingham. And I saw this city that was proud of building its own infrastructure, of building its own land and getting its investments back, where the money didn't leave Birmingham, it stayed in Birmingham. And I realized that Birmingham was a rebel city. And that's why I liked it. So I started to dig into more what Birmingham was about. And these are the things you do when you're an immigrant. You want to understand the ticking heart of the place that you're in. And so you find out things that people who live here don't care about. And I found out that Birmingham had never been a borough. It had never been built around a church. And had never been taxed by that church, and had the so-called protection of the church, which you only got if you paid those taxes. And so it had built as a trading station between London and Birmingham and York, and had been the kind of underground world of people who were trying to get away from the establishment of the day. And it became a place where you could have the old rites and the old traditions and the old religions. You'd be free to believe whatever you wanted to. You were free to start ventures that weren't sanctioned by the status quo of money in the country. And so there was a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in the area. And that's never left. There's this land, this place in Birmingham in the centre of Mercia that was never conquered by the Normans, that remained Saxon right up until Cromwell, still contained this heritage of being separate from the rest of the country. And I really liked that. And I've found that people hate their accent. It's the propaganda against Birmingham because of this political rivalry means that people say that if there's 19 people from all around the country sitting in an interview, the 19th person to get employed would be someone from Birmingham or the Black Country, just because of their accent. Why is that? The accent from Birmingham's beautiful. When my family go from Birmingham to South Africa, people love their accent. It's this welcoming, singy, songy, warm accent that flows. It's beautiful and it's understandable. So what's the problem here? And I found that people had lost touch with their heritage. And I find myself here as a South African championing Birmingham and the history of Birmingham and retelling people their story so that they can really grab hold of the fact that, wow, I've got something really proud to be proud of in being in Birmingham and being from Birmingham, or moving here and adopting Birmingham as my city. In South Africa, when I was growing up, jobs were secluded for white people only. So there was plenty of jobs because whites only took up 10% of the entire population. So cities, it meant that you could just go and work in anything you wanted to. In fact, you were practically spoiled for choice in terms of what work you could get. And as a young person, you could get work. There were no laws about hours that you could do as a young person. So I found myself being quite entrepreneurial as a young person and earning quite a bit and realizing I could make my money without studies quite easily. So when I got out of school, I did a short time of training as a minister, but wanted to live more life, wanted to be able to offer people more than religious knowledge. I wanted to speak to them about life, to counsel them. And so I wanted to get a job, but I didn't need to go and get a job. I was living in a country where I felt free enough to just try things out. So I started up a printing business. And I could make mistakes, and there were very little constraints on what I could do as a business. And I found it quite easy just to think, well, if this doesn't work, I'll actually, it takes less to start a coffee shop, and I could do that if I wanted to. And my brother and I talked about the possibility of doing that. And he went on and decided to become a estate agent, which is very different to what it is out here. And you could just flow from one job to the next, and there was a freedom of it. But at the same time, then Messiah, my brother, had come and lived with us, and he was finishing his schooling and realizing, well, what are the prospects for him? Even though the country's changing, he's still a black person. What kind of work is he going to get? He's super intelligent, but is that going to change how he has to work? In the end, he did find his own way, in a beautiful way, into radio, which we were doing a lot of, and became quite a personality in his own right. But it was a burning question in our minds. How come you've got so much freedom to do what you want to do, and I don't? How long is it going to take? 1 generation, 2 generations, 3 generations before we can feel free to work in whatever jobs we want to work in? And so those kind of things were with me when I came to this country. So I was still working my printing business, sold all that I had to do, all that I had, came over to this country. And the first big shock for me was selling everything up, selling all my business, buying my plane ticket, and coming over with some money that I thought would tie me over. And when I exchanged that money, it turned out to be £60. £60. And I thought, well, the pound must get you more in this country. And it didn't really. It kind of got you less than you would get in South Africa, and realizing, wow, the money is so strong and the value is so much less. Things are so much more expensive. And immediately when I started to get work, in the most fantastical way, you heard rumors in South Africa. There are shops on the high streets where you can walk past and they advertise jobs, and you can even go inside and they'll help you get jobs. Yeah, what? You're talking nonsense. There's nothing like that. You got to look for your own jobs. And you come to the city, and I arrived in Birmingham, and when I didn't want to work in Wetherspoons anymore and open pubs, I went along the streets, and there were agencies, job agencies, where you could walk in and they could help you get jobs. That was amazing. There were so many jobs, newspapers just full of jobs, and you could get them no matter what. And I thought, wow, this is cool. The world's my oyster. I can just work here. But the realizing that the pound, you couldn't get much for it, so you're going to have to work really, really hard. And there was no minimum wage back then. So I started working for £3.60 an hour, and was battling to pay my rent, really struggling to pay my bills, and thinking, I'm working hard. I'm working in an office job. I don't understand how I can be working all week and not have enough to pay my bills, my council tax, my rates. And that struck me as a really interesting thing. I realized that, wow, people are having to do 2 jobs here to make ends meet. That's tough. I'm going to have to work my way up and get more work. So I found myself looking for jobs that would pay more. I went into call centers where there was a strange mentality. People treated like children, made to clock in and clock out. When they wanted to go to the toilet, or when they came back from their lunch break, and if they were 30 seconds late, they'd get a warning. And if you got 3 warnings, you'd get fired. I thought, how can you treat a workforce like that? And I found that there was a difference. In South Africa, there was so much more respect for people who work in your workforce. Everyone had their role to play and was respected. And here, I came to this country and people weren't respected. Managers spoke down to their staff. People felt put upon. People felt like they had to protect their job, and so they wouldn't try change anything. They wouldn't rock the boat. Whereas as a South African, I wanted to make things better, streamline things, get things on the roll. So I thought, if I can sink myself into a business where I could really make an impact, that would be good. And so I looked for 5 different companies where I could work. I looked at IBM, AXA Insurance, a logistics company I can't remember the name of, and Marconi Telecommunications. And I thought, wow, here's a good company I can work with. And through a temping agency, I got a small job there, and found that working with data entry, students would come in and they'd work on data entry, and it was menial stuff. Plugging things into a computer, just words from a page onto a computer. And I would finish in no time at all. And the people I was working with would say, hey, Gav, can you just slow down? We're taking our time here. We just want to do our work and go home. I said, but I don't want to just do this job. I want to do more. So I'd finish my work and I'd walk around this office, this managerial office, and I'd ask people, is there anything I can do for you? And people say, yeah, can you do this spreadsheet? I say, yeah, sure, no problem. I had no idea how to do a spreadsheet. I'd go to someone else in the office and say, do you know how to do spreadsheets? And learn how to do it, and then do spreadsheets for people. And then walk around, still had more time. I went into the director's office and say, hi, can I do anything for you? People have been asking me to do spreadsheets. And she'd say, no, but can you do graphs? Can you turn a spreadsheet into a graph? No problem, I'd say, and walk out and find somebody who could teach me how to do graphs. And then the director, when jobs were coming up for assistant project managers, she thought, oh, there's this kid in the office. He's really got enthusiasm. And I was interviewed and I got the position. And then I worked my way up within the project management world because everyone sat behind a desk and project managed engineering schemes around the country without ever going to those schemes and speaking to the engineers. I wanted to speak to them, so I'd go to the engineers and speak to them. I'd go to the factories and find out what the parts looked like that they needed. And because I had this new way of working, things got done quicker and done better. And so I moved my way up to being a project assistant, to being a project manager, to overseeing several areas in the country, until eventually I was running half of the country's engineering apart from London. I was running Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and England, and just not the bottom half of the country. Running all of the engineering schemes so that you have broadband today. That's what my engineers were doing. All because I had enthusiasm and because I wouldn't settle for things being the way they were. And all the time coming against people in workplaces who just wanted to do their job and go home. Didn't want to rock the boat just in case they lost their job. So somewhere along the line in South Africa, I'd been imbued with the idea that you needed to rock the boat. You needed to change things. And so I felt free to go and get another job. And when I wasn't satisfied with what that was giving me, to get another job. Finish up at Marconi, work for Owen Williams Railways. And then something happened. I was working so hard and enjoying moving up and getting more money and getting my wages that I was ignoring my health. And I got to the stage where I worked myself through sickness so that my body did something really strange. I got an illness that's known as ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, where my whole body went out of whack. I was someone who was playing football, running for the local university public team, active, involved, hiking, walking, very enthusiastic, to being not even able to get out of bed. And it was time for me to learn about benefits, which I'd never come across and never discovered. Time for me to come to terms with what it would mean if I couldn't work, and to start to identify with people's ideas in this country of how that work is everything. If you don't work, you're not worth anything. But I can't work. What am I worth? And that was a whole different story of learning to come to terms with the fact that I have more to offer society than working. When I got ill, I had to rediscover myself. I found that in being in the country, I had taken on the same work ethic as was here. Everything was about work. Everything was about earning. Everything was about getting a bigger house, a better car, better clothes. And had worked myself into the ground, and now didn't have the money that I had before, even on these benefits that everyone seemed to say that people fought for. You barely got by. How did people live like this? And I had to find what I could do, not to earn any more money, but so that I could find some sanity in the situation that I was living in. I started to search for what I could offer, even in my ill health. And I immediately turned to writing. I had so many stories to tell. I'd come from this incredible country with such contrasting tales of hardship and freedom, of lies and beautiful truths, of freedom and incarcerations, that I wanted to tell those stories. So I found myself writing and finding a voice there, but not knowing where to put it out, how to get published or any of those kind of things. And I, in the midst of finding my stories, was counseling myself, finding out deeper truths about how I saw the world and what I wanted to give to people, that I wanted people to be free from their ideas about themselves, free from the ideas that the world put upon them, and found myself wanting to be the minister that I'd thought that I'd wanted to be when I was young and trained, to actually help people to really get to grips with the fact that they were amazing, every single one of them. But how could I do that? So I looked into doing social work, and I remember going to Enter Training College, which was in the Birmingham city centre near St. Chad's Church, and they were taking young people and putting them through employment courses, helping them to do CVs and things like that, but also quietly, carefully taking them off on residential camping trips and trips to go go-karting or paintballing and things like that, and just getting these kids to have fun. But as they were doing it, the constraints were being put on what you could do with children, and they were shutting down these risky endeavors to try and help kids to see that they didn't have to live in Uzels anymore. There was a wider Birmingham, and Birmingham was part of a wider country, which was part of a wider world, and you were free and you were safe to explore your own ideas. So I thought, God, if the country's slamming down on working with children through the normal means, is there another way? And I realized that the things I was writing about, the people I was writing to didn't want to hear the truth, and the people I was writing for already knew the story. So who was I writing to? And I couldn't find anything. I found a whole area where I didn't know what my work could be and what I could contribute. And in the time I got together with my now wife, who was raising her children and living as a mother, and doing a lot of hard work living as a mother, and being paid by the country to be a mother, and being proud of that, and realizing, wow, there's you've got real value bringing up your kids, and don't let anybody tell you any different. Can I have the value in just being a dad? Is that okay? Just in staying home and being with my children? Yes, to a degree, but I still felt like I wanted to impact more than my kids. And then I was introduced to a storyteller, as someone who told stories to adults. Once upon a time, there was a king, and the king was true and bold and broken in every way a man can be. Ooh, that was a shock. I thought he was going to be the hero of the story, but maybe he was. And there was depth inside of stories and truths that you could grasp hold of, and the cleverness within stories. I went to more and more and more storytelling, and realized that it didn't point fingers. It said the donkey needed to change, not you. I could feel like I was a bit of an ass, really, but no one was pointing fingers at me, and there was a power within storytelling, and I could use this storytelling as a mode to get through to people in a way that I couldn't with social work. I could do the same work. I could use storytelling as a Trojan horse to inspire people to their own cultural heritage and their truths about themselves, and pride and aspirations and inspiration. And I'm just telling stories. That's all I'm doing. And so I started to explore the mode of telling stories. The local library allowed me to volunteer. She knew I had ME, so she supported me. I told stories to groups of kids in the holidays. Then she asked me to do a school group, and then another school group. And then it started to feel like I'm doing a lot of this. And I'm feeling like I was so happy with it that somewhere along the line I was healing myself, and doing what I loved maybe was what was part of it, finding who I was. And I realized I could actually maybe do this as a job. I approached the job center and said, well, I'm not sure I can do this full time, but can you support me to work in this venture? And they did. I actually got the support to work and to get a small amount from the government through this ESA employment scheme. In a time where in this country benefits were being cut terribly and people were suffering, I was still getting more money and more help from this government than I ever would have got in South Africa, where if you don't work, you don't eat. That's it. So realizing that I've been really supported by this country, I've just wanted to give back. So I've continued to tell stories. And as the more I've told stories, the more I realize that we're a very broken people on this whole planet, living in fear of scarcity, in fear of our own skins, in fear of our own truths, and that through stories I can really awaken an ancient spirit, a beautiful wisdom inside of everybody, and show that everybody is intelligent in their own way. And the more I tell stories, whether it's to toddlers or to folks with dementia, whether I'm working with autistic children or athletes, it doesn't matter. Everybody has something to explore within themselves. And so now I tell the stories, true life stories about my country, about Birmingham, fantastical tales that I've written and made myself, or traditional tales that people have forgotten because people watch the TV and look at their phones and don't talk to each other anymore. And certainly grandmothers don't tell their children stories around the dinner table. So I've got a responsibility to carry forward stories, to make more storytellers, to reawaken the stories inside of us. And so that's what I do. It's a calling more than a job.
What does it mean to be a Burmese?
To meld, to not be who you once were, to be adopted. As an immigrant coming to this country and finding that there was so much segregation, I find now I look around Birmingham and young people don't even know what they have. You'll see school kids climbing off a bus, and there's a young black guy who likes reading Yeats poetry. There's a hijabby girl who actually plays blues guitar. There's a white geek guy who does beatboxing and breakdancing. There's just this mix of cultures in this city that's absolutely beautiful. And somebody asked me earlier today. In fact, I was telling stories in a library, and said, why are you in Birmingham? You could have lived anywhere in the whole of the country. I said, we've gone to so many different places. And I find, like, we went to Bath or Devon and Malvern and found people trapped by their wealth, so stuck in their wealth that they're judging themselves and each other and other people all the time. And I wanted to be free. And in Birmingham, you're free. People are accepted at whatever level they're at. We wanted to go to places where there was beautiful scenery and life, but they didn't have the culture that Birmingham has. To be part of Birmingham is to be arty and to be proud of it, to be on the edge of art, to be standing up for what you believe and saying the things that they wouldn't say anywhere else in the country. So being a rebel, being out there, and being free to pursue things in a way that wouldn't be accepted in the rest of the country. I like that. Being in Birmingham, being adopted. I've been here 20 years, just over. So 21 years, in fact, 21 years in my country, 21 years here, but this is home. And I've been completely accepted as a spokesperson, as a speaker. I get invited to compare, to run events, and sometimes even to represent Birmingham. And then people are surprised because they've read about my profile, read about my works in the projects I've been doing. And then they meet me and realize, oh, but you're South African. I say, but I'm Brummie too. And I love Birmingham. There's something, people are so proud of being from the city, and they're right to be. So being a proud rebel.
How do you feel about telling your story? What effect do you think it will have on your audiences?
I like to break people's perceptions, to see that you don't have to be who you look like. You don't have to be the culture that you wear. That people can make have many preconceptions about who you are, but until you get to tell the story, they might have judged you in many different ways. So I'm glad, because I've got to be an undercover agent wearing a white skin. So I've got to go in and find out things that other immigrants wouldn't find out. I've got to find out racism and why it lives there, and the true heart of it, of a government turning its back on its own workforce, and the anger that's fostered. I've got to go in and find out why people are threatened, what holds them back from learning about other people. So I feel like being able to tell my story is being able to give Birmingham and the country and the people here a different image of themselves, to give young people an idea that don't judge people at face value. They might have a black country accent and work in a factory, but they might also work on perpetual energy in their shed. They might actually be an artist in their spare time. The old woman who's kind of mean might just have arthritis, but she's got a lot of stories to tell. The Jamaican woman who only speaks in patois, knows Birmingham inside out, and is sat with kings. You just don't know what is behind people's eyes, what's inside their souls. And so I feel like telling the story feels like important, because there's lots more to tell. Not just about me, but about everybody. And that's what I want people to discover.